Ashes, iron, and an impossible pact. Cora Maddox despises Colonel Harding's cold, calculated rules. Nathaniel Harding has long ago closed his heart to the world, but fate has locked them both behind the high walls of a restless garrison. She craves justice. He seeks a path to redemption. In a world fueled by prejudice and betrayal, the friction between them is the only thing that feels real, until the first touch changes the rules of the game. Witness the journey of Cora and Nathaniel, two soldiers fighting a different kind of war, where the ultimate victory can only be found in surrender. The Memphis night was a velvet glove pressed over the city, stifling and warm, but inside the Gaslight Hotel, the air was a brittle mix of cigar smoke and forced civility. Cora Ruth Maddox stood near a potted palm, her back straight against the flocked wallpaper, and watched the Bureau's charity ball swirl with a discordant energy. Officers in blue wool brushed past planters in worn but proud broadcloth. The rustle of northern silk gowns seemed to hiss against the stiff taffeta of local matrons. Her own dress, a serviceable dove grey meant for a Boston classroom, felt like a flag of surrender. She was here under duress, a token of the Freedmen's Aid Society's presence, and every glance slid over her with polite dismissal or open contempt. She sipped tepid lemonade, the sweet taste cloying, and fixed her gaze on the man at the room's center. Colonel Nathaniel Cole Harding, Viscount Harding, moved through the crowd with the grim efficiency of a surveyor plotting a trench line. His evening dress was impeccable, the black cloth emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the leanness of his frame. The gaslight caught the silver sweeping through his dark hair, a premature frost that made his face seem all the more severe. His eyes, a shade between oak and amber, scanned the room, missing nothing, the averted gaze, the too tight smile, but revealed nothing of his own mind. He exchanged words with a northern congressman, his voice a low, measured rumble she could not hear, but the set of his jaw spoke of a man enduring a necessary siege. A society chaperone had pointed him out earlier. The Bureau's chief architect here, she'd whispered, as if describing a dangerous, complex machine. They say he's ruthless, but effective, a man of pure calculus. Cora's fingers tightened around her glass. She knew his type. Men of calculus saw lives as variables, causes as logistical problems. Her school, her students, would be mere entries in a ledger. As if summoned by her thought, he disengaged from the congressman, and his path altered, cutting directly toward her. The crowd seemed to part before him. He stopped a pace away, and she was struck by his height, by the sheer contained presence of him. Up close, the weariness in his eyes was not mere fatigue, but a deep, settled attrition. "Miss Maddox." His greeting was not a question. "I am Colonel Harding." "Colonel." She inclined her head, the minimal civility required. The melodious tone she used with her students was banked, replaced by a cool firmness. "I understand you operate the Freedmen's School on Poplar Avenue." "I do." "It is a commendable work." The words were correct, empty of inflection. "And a vulnerable one. My reports indicate increasing unrest in that quarter." A spark ignited in her chest. "Unrest is a gentle word for malice, Colonel." For a second, something flickered behind his detached expression, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of her refusal to soften the truth. "Malice requires practical deterrence. My office could extend its patrols, place a permanent guard at the schoolhouse." The offer, delivered so bluntly, felt less like protection and more like an annexation. She saw it instantly. The blue uniform on her step, the curious, frightened eyes of her students, the heavy implication that her authority was borrowed from his. "Your protection is generous," she said, her voice clear enough for the nearby guests to overhear. "But we are not a garrison. We are a place of learning. The presence of soldiers at the door would teach a lesson I do not wish my students to learn." His gaze held hers, and she felt its weight, the intensity of a man used to being obeyed. "There are lessons in safety, Miss Maddox." "And there are lessons in autonomy," she countered, her chin lifting. The unruly curl that always escaped her chignon brushed her temple, a tiny rebellion against the stifling room. "We thank you for your concern, but we must decline." A muscle tightened beside his mouth. It was the only sign that her refusal had landed. He gave a curt, shallow nod, the motion of a man closing a file. "I see. Then I will not detain you further." He turned and was absorbed back into the throng, leaving her standing alone by the palm. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but her palms were damp, her breath slightly tight. She had expected pressure, persuasion. She had not expected this cold, surgical offer, nor the even colder efficiency with which he accepted her refusal. A nearby planter chuckled into his whiskey, the sound carrying. "The Yankee schoolmarm has sand. I'll give her that. Harding's not a man you say no to." Cora set her glass on a passing tray, the clink of crystal decisive. She had come tonight as a symbol, and she would leave as one, of defiance. But as she walked from the ballroom, the weight of the colonel's weary, calculating eyes seemed to follow her, and the warm Memphis night outside felt suddenly presciently cold. Dawn in Memphis arrived not with color, but with a persistent, acrid grayness. The scent of charred timber and wet cinders permeated the narrow lane behind the baker's shop, a bitter counterpoint to the warm, yeasty aroma rising from the ovens below. Cora Ruth Maddox stood at her small window, a shawl pulled tight over her nightdress, and watched the tendrils of mist coil through the ruins of the freedmen's school. The whitewashed schoolhouse, her bastion of hope, was now a skeletal scar against the paling sky. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory of flames against the night of the crude cross planted in the yard burned behind them. The colonel's words from the bureau ball echoed with a terrible, new clarity. A target. A liability. Her refusal of his protection now tasted like prideful soot on her tongue. A firm, rhythmic knock sounded at her door below. Too early for the baker's boy, too authoritative for a neighbor. Her breath caught, the air in her small room suddenly too thin. She knew with a certainty that settled in her marrow who stood upon the step. Descending the narrow stairs, she paused to gather herself, pressing her palms flat against the rough wool of her skirt to still their tremor. She would not grant him the satisfaction of seeing her undone. Unlatching the door, she pulled it open. Colonel Nathaniel Harding filled the frame, his greatcoat damp with mist, the silver at his temples gleaming like polished coin in the weak light. His posture was rigid, yet the deep-set amber gaze that met hers held a weariness that seemed to take in both her and the devastation of the lane beyond. He did not speak, merely removed his hat, his expression unreadable. "You have come to say, 'I told you so, Colonel.'" The words emerged from Cora's throat, melodious still, but stripped of all its former conviction, leaving only a raw edge. "I have come," he stated, his voice a low, weathered sound that carried over the distant crow of a rooster, "to repeat my offer, with amended terms." He did not wait for an invitation, stepping past her into the small, sparsely furnished sitting room. His presence seemed to shrink the space, the military precision of his bearing a stark contrast to her humble books and neatly stacked slates. He turned to face her, his gaze sweeping over her face, noting the shadows beneath her intelligent hazel eyes, the chestnut curl that had already escaped its nighttime plait. "The situation has escalated. You are no longer merely a target for intimidation. You are a testament to their success. This," he gestured slightly toward the window, "will embolden them. Then your bureau has failed." She forced her hands to unclench at her sides. "Your soldiers, your authority, it is all parchment and promises. It did not stop them." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "It did not. My resources are stretched, my authority contested at every turn, which is why my offer is no longer a suggestion, Miss Maddox. It is a bargain, the only one that has any hope of preserving your work, and my commission." He laid it out with bureaucratic clarity, each point a stone building a wall around her choices. Immediate relocation of her classes to the secured grounds of his headquarters. Armed guard, day and night. In return, his office would fund and oversee the construction of a new school, a proper brick building with a solid door and shuttered windows. A citadel for learning. Cora listened, the chill of the morning seeping through her sleeves. "And the price for this citadel, beyond my obedience?" His gaze held hers, unflinching. "My work here is being evaluated by a congressional committee in 6 weeks. I require a social guide, a hostess capable of navigating the political salons of Memphis and presenting our efforts in a palatable light to northern stakeholders and reluctant local gentry. You possess the education, the bearing, and the connections I lack. You will serve in this capacity for the duration. Succeed in helping me secure their support, and the school is yours permanently. Fail, and my commission and all protection for your people is revoked." The sheer calculating audacity of it left her silent. He saw her not as a victim, but as an instrument, a weapon of social warfare. Her throat tightened. "You wish to use me as a lure, a polished, respectable face to distract from the conflict." "I wish to use your intellect and your credibility to secure a future," he corrected, his tone devoid of warmth. "This is not a drawing room game. It is a campaign, and we have 6 weeks until the review. Do you have a better strategy?" She looked past him, through the window to the smouldering ruin. She saw the faces of her students, their hopeful eyes. She thought of the small, charcoal drawing of a bird one of the children had pressed into her hand only yesterday, now lost to the flames. Her cause demanded survival, not martyrdom. "My independence in the classroom remains absolute," she said, her own voice firming, finding its footing on this treacherous ground. The curriculum, the students admitted. No military interference. Agreed. The guards remain at the perimeter, they do not enter the schoolroom. Agreed. And when the 6 weeks are concluded, regardless of the outcome of your review, the construction of the brick schoolhouse begins. Your word of honor as an officer and a gentleman on that point, Colonel. For a moment, something shifted in those weary depths, a recognition of her own strategic mind, perhaps. He gave a single curt nod. "You have my word." Silence fell between them, thick with the terms of their surrender. The baker's oven door clanged shut downstairs. A new day was beginning, one forged in cinders and resolve. "Pack your belongings," Colonel Harding said, replacing his hat. "A wagon will be here within the hour. You will take your meals at headquarters. Consider yourself under garrison protection, effective immediately." He turned to leave, then paused on the threshold, his broad shoulders blocking the light. He did not look back. "The destruction of your school is a personal failure of my command, Miss Maddox. This bargain is my redress. Do not mistake it for charity." Then he was gone, his bootsteps echoing on the cobbles. Cora stood motionless, the enormity of the choice settling upon her shoulders. She had just bartered her freedom for a future. She had agreed to stand beside the most formidable, detached man she had ever encountered, to perform a partnership that felt, in its very conception, like a betrayal of her solitary struggle. As she moved to gather her few precious books, her fingers brushed the cool surface of a slate. She lifted it, seeing the ghost of yesterday's lesson in the faint grey dust. A verse from Byron, now bitter irony. "Who would be free themselves must strike the blow." She had struck no blow. She had capitulated. And yet, as she looked toward the garrison on the hill, a strange, cold resolve crystallized within her. The battle had merely changed its field, and her new commander, she suspected, was a man who understood the cost of victory far too well. The question that gripped her, tightening like a vice as the wagon rolled into view, was whether the price of his victory would demand the last of her own bruised and steadfast spirit. Colonel Nathaniel Harding's headquarters stood as an island of ordered authority amidst the city's wounds. A requisitioned cotton factor's warehouse, its red brick walls were now patrolled by blue-coated sentries, its loading docks reinforced with timber barricades. To Cora Ruth Maddox, clutching a single valise that held the sum of her worldly possessions, it resembled not a sanctuary, but a bastion she was entering of her own will. She had given her answer at noon, standing in the soot-streaked lane behind the baker's shop. The colonel had not smiled, merely inclined his head once, a gesture that acknowledged terms accepted, not a victory won. He had instructed her to present herself at the compound by 3 o'clock. Now, as the Memphis sun pressed upon the dusty yard, the finality of the transaction settled like a lead weight beneath her ribs. A young lieutenant, his face unsettlingly smooth beneath his cap, escorted her through the gates. The interior was a cavernous space of regimented bustle. The scent of ink, male sweat, and coal oil supplanted the familiar aromas of bread and yeast. Clerks scratched at ledgers, uniformed men moved with purpose, and the air vibrated with the staccato chatter of telegraph keys. It was a realm of masculine utility, and Cora's simple dove-grey dress seemed a fragile anomaly. Miss Maddox. The address, though not loud, severed the ambient noise. He emerged from an office partitioned by glass, his frame imposing against the functional backdrop. His dark uniform coat bore no ornament save for his rank, and his posture was taut, as if his spine refused to concede the weariness carved beside his eyes. "Colonel," she replied, her own tone carefully tempered to mirror his formality. "Your quarters." He did not offer to take her valise, but turned, expecting her to follow. He led her up a set of iron stairs to a gallery overlooking the main floor. At its end stood a door, which he opened to reveal a small, spare sitting room. Beyond, through another doorway, she glimpsed a bedroom. The windows here were high and latticed with iron, casting geometric shadows upon a serviceable rug and a desk burdened with reports. These were the factors' offices. They are secure. A sentry will be posted at the stair night and day. Cora set her valise down, absorbing the martial austerity. "I see I am to be both guest and detainee." "You are to be secure," he corrected, the words worn smooth by command. "The schoolroom is being prepared in the old stables. It will be ready for your pupils tomorrow morning. They will be escorted to and from the gates in groups." "And my duties as hostess?" The word tasted of unfamiliar peril. Nathaniel moved to the desk, retrieving a sheet of paper. "We begin this evening. A small gathering. Local merchants, a judge attempting neutrality, and a representative from the Memphis Daily Post. Your role is to converse, to express measured optimism about the Bureau's educational initiatives, to be a living rebuttal to the caricature of a radical northern harridan." A familiar heat kindled behind her breastbone. "You wish me to perform palatability." "I wish you to perform credibility," he stated, holding her clear hazel gaze. "There is a difference. One is artifice. The other is strategic truth. Your work is credible. It must simply be seen to be so by men who have closed their eyes." He placed the paper before her. It was a list of names, annotated with brief notes on affiliations and sensitivities. "You have 2 hours to familiarize yourself. Dinner is at 7. I will send Mrs. Peabody, the wife of my quartermaster, to advise on your attire." He turned to leave, his boots precise on the plank floor. "Colonel Harding." He paused at the threshold, looking back. "This bargain of ours," Cora said, folding her hands to quiet their faint tremor. "It operates in both directions. You have stipulated my obligations. I now stipulate mine. I will not lie. I will not soften my beliefs for digestion. I will speak of literacy, of citizenship, of a future built by law. If your guests find that indigestible, that is a failure of their constitution, not of my performance." For a prolonged moment, he simply regarded her. His gaze held no approval, but something else, a considering flicker that moved beyond mere strategy. He gave a curt nod. "Honesty, however unwelcome, has a force of its own." "Very well. But remember, Miss Maddox, the objective is not to win debates. It is to win time." His glance swept the room, the latticed windows. "This is the cost of that bastion for learning you desire. I trust you find the accommodation sufficient." He was gone before she could reply, the door closing with a soft, definitive click. Cora stood alone in the silence, the hum of the headquarters below now a distant hive. She walked to the window. The view was of the interior yard, where soldiers drilled in the ochre light of late afternoon. Her world had contracted from a schoolhouse, however vulnerable, to this single, guarded point. She was a strategic asset in his campaign. The knowledge sat, dense and cold, within her. Yet, as her fingers traced the list he had left, Judge William Prentice favors commerce over conflict. Mr. Alastair Finch, press, susceptible to appeals to progress. A treacherous current stirred. It was the same spark that lit when facing a classroom of eager faces, the challenge of a difficult lesson. He had not asked for flattery. He had asked for a translation of truth into a language power might comprehend. It was a manipulation, but one that demanded her intellect, not her submission. Mrs. Peabody arrived precisely an hour later, a kind-faced woman with a gown of suitable dark silk over her arm. As she fussed with hairpins, attempting to tame the chestnut curls that resisted order, Cora studied her reflection. The woman in the glass appeared strained but steadfast. She was not a reluctant hostess. She was a teacher entering a new, more perilous classroom. At 7 o'clock, a knock came. She opened the door to find Colonel Harding waiting, his uniform exchanged for a black evening coat that rendered the silver at his temples more severe. He offered his arm, the gesture impeccably correct. As her fingers rested lightly on the dark wool, she felt the unyielding muscle beneath, a latent tension humming through him like a tuned wire. "The first examination, Miss Maddox," he murmured, the words for her alone as they approached the murmur of voices from the makeshift dining hall below. "Then let us hope, Colonel," she replied, her voice steady, "that we have both prepared our lessons adequately." But as they descended into the gauntlet of curious, skeptical and hostile faces, Cora knew no preparation could armor her against the sudden, unnerving realization. Her greatest vulnerability in this bargain might not be the political enemies arrayed before her, but the disquieting solidity of the arm she was compelled to take. The list arrived with the morning coffee, a single sheet of foolscap placed beside the chipped porcelain cup by a silent orderly. Cora Ruth Maddox, seated at the serviceable desk in her gallery quarters, regarded the document as if it were a warrant. The colonel's script was as disciplined as the man himself. Sharp, vertical strokes, no flourish, efficient ink. Each name bore a terse commentary that mapped the battlefield upon which she was to deploy that evening. Mr. Josiah P. Finch, merchant dry goods. Sympathies mercantile. Priority, contracts for bureau supplies. Sensitivity, avoid direct mention of suffrage. The Honourable Judge Arthur LeMay. Sympathies, officially neutral. Priority, perceived legitimacy of bureau courts. Sensitivity, wife's family owns significant acreage in Mississippi. Mr. Horace Greeley, no relation, Memphis Daily Post. Sympathies, conditional unionist. Priority, favourable coverage. Sensitivity, prone to rhetorical flourishes on Southern character. Cora's finger hovered over the words. This was the blueprint of her cage. She had stipulated her terms, no lies, no softening of belief. Yet here, in this clinical notation, was the architecture of a different persuasion, one of implication, omission, and strategic emphasis. The clear, bright truth she taught her pupils seemed to waver in the room's thin light. A firm rap sounded at her door precisely at 10 o'clock. She had expected Mrs. Peabody, the quartermaster's wife, to advise on dress. Instead, the door opened to reveal Colonel Nathaniel Cole Harding. He filled the doorway, his blue frock coat buttoned to the throat, his bearing a study in contained force. The pale streaks at his temples caught the cool light from the high, barred windows. "Miss Maddox, I trust you have reviewed the materials." "I have." She did not rise. "It reads less like a guest list and more like an officer's dispatch. In Memphis, the distinction is negligible." He stepped inside, closing the door, and the space contracted around his presence. His gaze, a deep amber in the room's shadows, swept over the desk. The open ledger where she had begun planning lessons for the stables. Schoolroom, the humble stack of primers. "Mrs. Peabody is indisposed. I will brief you on the evening's choreography. You are to tutor me in etiquette." The question held a faint, incredulous edge. "In the particular etiquette of political salvage," he corrected, his voice a low, worn baritone. He remained standing, a commander in a subordinate's quarters. "The purpose is not debate. It is demonstration. You are to demonstrate that the Bureau's work is civilized, orderly, and non-threatening to legitimate commerce and law. Your northern education, your manner, are assets. Your convictions must be sheathed." Cora stood then, unable to remain seated under this inspection. "You wish me to be a placard, a well-spoken one. I require you to be a bridge," he said, and for the first time she detected a thread of something beyond bureaucratic precision, a weariness with the very game he orchestrated. These men hold pieces of the future. Finch controls goods. LeMay, the semblance of law. Greeley, public sentiment. Alone, I am an occupying soldier. With you, we become a partnership of reconstruction. That is the narrative. And what is my line in this narrative? To smile and pour tea while speaking of literacy in the abstract? He moved to the window. observing the compound where two privates applied fresh limewash to the old stable walls. "Your line," he said, his back to her, "is to mention the new schoolhouse's reinforced door and windows only once, and in passing, as a regrettable necessity due to lawless elements. You are to steer Judge LeMay's questions about curriculum toward the economic advantages of a numerate, literate workforce. You are to agree, with apparent thoughtfulness, with Greeley's platitudes about Southern resilience, then pivot to the resilience of those who seek education against all odds." Cora listened, a cool, heavy comprehension settling beneath her ribs. It was a form of combat, subtle and lethal. "And when Mr. Finch asks in that bluff way merchants do, if I truly believe a field hand can learn Cicero." Nathaniel turned from the window. His expression was not unreadable. It was intensely focused, the weary lines of his face sharpening as his attention fixed upon her. "Then you will look him in the eye, and with that firm, melodious voice of yours, you will say, 'I believe, sir, that any man who can master the complex arithmetic of cotton futures and ledger debt can, with application, master a sonnet. The capacity is not the issue, the opportunity is.'" He paused. "That will flatter him, confuse him, and elevate the argument beyond his reach. It is also, I note, the truth." A startling, unwelcome spark of kinship flashed through her. He had not instructed her to lie. He had, in fact, weaponized her truth, shaping it for maximum effect. It was brilliant and utterly disarming. "You have a talent for this," she said, the accusation soft. "It is not talent. It is a tactical skill, learned in drawing rooms that were far more perilous than any battlefield." He took a step closer, and the scent of starch and faint leather brushed her senses. "You must remember that for these men, this is a social event. The weapons are anecdote, courtesy, and the subtle withdrawal of approval. Your greatest advantage is that they will underestimate you. They expect a blue-stocking missionary, full of fire and scripture. They will not be prepared for a strategist." The word hung between them. Strategist. It acknowledged her as an equal participant in this charade, not merely a tool. It was, perhaps, the first compliment he had paid her that did not pertain to her usefulness. "And you, Colonel," she asked, emboldened, "what is your role in this performance?" "I am the guarantor of order," he replied without hesitation. "The firm hand that makes your gentle persuasion possible. I will speak of infrastructure, of railroad tariffs, of property law. You will speak of human potential. Together, we form a complete and thus palatable picture." He reached into his coat and produced another, smaller paper. "These are the likely topics of conversation, with suggested redirects. Study them. Mrs. Peabody will attend you at 4 with a suitable gown." He placed the paper next to the foolscap. For a moment his hand rested on the desk near her own. It was a soldier's hand, marked by old scars and strength, and the sight of it so close to her own, which was lightly stained with ink and chalk, seemed to still the very dust motes in the air. "This is what you meant by social warfare," she said, her voice lower. "It is." He withdrew his hand. "The stakes are your school, my commission, and the stability of this office for the next 6 weeks. I trust you find your armor sufficient." He left then, with a precise nod, closing the door softly behind him. Cora sank into her chair, the lists before her transformed. They were no longer mere instructions. They were a shared cipher, a language of survival he had just taught her. The acute awareness she had felt in the ruins of her school kindled again, not into hope but into a sharp, lucid understanding. Colonel Harding was not merely a rigid commander. He was a deeply pragmatic one, who saw in her not just a liability or an asset, but a potential ally. And that recognition, she realized as her pulse settled into a determined rhythm, was far more perilous to her guarded heart than any command he could issue. For how does one maintain a steadfast opposition to a man who has just looked upon you and seen with perfect clarity a fellow soldier? The dining room of the requisitioned warehouse had undergone a martial transformation. The long table, usually strewn with maps and dispatches, had been scrubbed to a dull sheen and covered with a borrowed linen cloth. Army-issue candlesticks, polished to a harsh brilliance, stood between platters of roasted chicken and bowls of stewed apples. The air, usually thick with ink and coal oil, now carried the scent of beeswax and thyme. It was a stage, meticulously set. Colonel Nathaniel Harding, stood at the head of the table, his blue frock coat buttoned with exactitude, the silver at his temples gleaming in the candlelight. He surveyed the assembled guests with the detached focus of a commander assessing terrain. Mr. Josiah P. Finch, the dry goods merchant, chewed with methodical appreciation. Judge Arthur LeMay sipped claret, his expression a careful blank. Horace Greeley, of the Memphis Daily Post, already wielded his fork like a pen, preparing his next editorial flourish. But Nathaniel's attention, against his own directive, kept returning to the woman seated at the table's foot. Cora Maddox wore a dress of deep slate blue, provided by the indisposed Mrs. Peabody. It was modest, high-necked, and became her slender frame. Her chestnut hair was subdued into a smooth coil, though one persistent curl had escaped to brush her cheek. She listened to Greeley hold forth on the indomitable spirit of the southern soil, her expression one of polite attentiveness. Nathaniel noted the precise angle of her chin, the stillness of her hands folded in her lap. She was performing just as he had instructed. The knowledge should have satisfied him. It did not. "And it is that very spirit," Greeley continued, dabbing his lips, "which shall be the true engine of recovery, not these external administrations." "Resilience is indeed a remarkable quality," Cora said, her tone clear and carrying. Nathaniel felt the muscles of his shoulders tighten. "I observe it daily in my pupils. After a full day laboring in fields or kitchens, they come to their lessons with a hunger for letters that humbles me. That is a spirit no flame can erase." Judge LeMay's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Finch grunted, non-committal. Greeley, momentarily derailed, offered a tight smile. "Admirable, I'm sure, though one wonders if such energies might be better directed toward more practical skills." Nathaniel watched the faint tremor that passed through Cora's fingers, where they rested against the dark fabric of her skirt. He intervened, his voice a low rasp that sliced through the tension. "Practicality is our shared aim, Mr. Greeley. A man who can read a contract is less likely to be cheated. A woman who can keep accounts can run a market stall. Stability follows such competence. Commerce, benefits." He glanced at Finch, who gave a slow nod of concession. "An orderly workforce," the judge mused, setting down his glass. "There is merit in that. Law requires order." "It does," Cora agreed, turning that clear hazel focus upon him. "And law, to be respected, must be justly applied. My students wish to understand the laws that now govern them, to become citizens in full standing. That seems the most practical foundation of all." The table fell silent, save for the clink of cutlery. Nathaniel felt a sudden, unwarranted heat in his chest. She had threaded the needle, speaking her truth within the framework he had provided. She had not lied. She had not softened. She had simply shone a light, and the shadows of their guests' prejudices were thrown into sharp relief. The conversation moved, stiltedly, to cotton prices and river traffic. Cora answered questions about her Boston education with brevity, deftly steering talk back to the classroom. She mentioned the new schoolhouse's security features exactly once, calling them unfortunate necessities in uncertain times, as coached. Nathaniel found himself speaking less, observing more. He saw the intelligent flicker in her expression as she passed a comment, the firm set of her mouth when Finch made a dismissive remark about the classical capacities of the Negro mind. When the moment came, she was ready. "Cicero, Mr. Finch, spoke of the bonum commune, the common good," she said, her tone not argumentative but instructive, as if addressing a slightly slow student. "The principle does not require a Latin primer to be understood. It requires only the recognition that another's advancement is not one's own diminishment. My eldest pupil, a man of 50 who was whipped for looking at a newspaper, can now pass that concept. I find his understanding more profound than that of many who have declaimed the orations in original Latin for fashion's sake." Finch's neck mottled above his collar. Greeley leaned forward, intrigued. Judge LeMay studied Cora with a new, cautious curiosity. Nathaniel felt the ground of the evening shift beneath his boots. This was not the placid, palatable demonstration he had orchestrated. This was something more dangerous, more authentic. Cora was not merely presenting a narrative. She was commanding the room with the quiet authority of conviction. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had sought a polished instrument. He had unleashed a formidable ally. As the guests departed with murmured thanks and measured cordiality, Nathaniel stood rigidly at the door, offering correct farewells. Cora remained by the table, straightening a candlestick, her profile etched in the dwindling light. When the last guest was gone, the sentry resuming his post outside, the cavernous room echoed with their shared silence. Nathaniel approached her. The performance was over. The aftermath remained. "You deviated from the briefing," he stated, though the accusation he intended was absent from his worn, thin voice. She turned to face him. The polite mask had fallen, leaving behind a fatigue that mirrored his own, and a determined gleam that was entirely hers. "I did not. I spoke of literacy, citizenship, and a future built by law. You defined the terms, Colonel. You did not dictate the text." He could not contradict her. The success of the evening, the palpable shift in the room's atmosphere, was her doing. His carefully constructed strategy had been a vessel. She had filled it with a potency he had not anticipated. "Judge LeMay is thinking," he conceded. "Greeley has a nuance for his column. Finch is unsettled, which may be beneficial." He paused, studying the weary lines at the corners of her eyes. "It was effectively done." A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. How gratifying. The tool performed beyond expectation. The word, his own cold assessment thrown back at him, lanced through his habitual restraint. "You are not a tool." The roughness in his tone was pronounced. "Am I not?" She held his look, the challenge unmistakable. "I am the respectable face, the northern accent, the moral gloss for your political salvage. You made the bargain quite clear." He took a single step closer, the space between them suddenly charged, not with the politics of the evening, but with something far more personal. "I required a partner for a narrative. It seems I have acquired one for the reality." He saw the surprise flicker in her gaze, quickly veiled. "That reality, Miss Maddox, is that you unnerved them, and in doing so, you may have secured more genuine ground than my calculations ever could." She looked away, toward the darkened windows that mirrored their isolated figures. "Do not credit me with strategy. I simply grew tired of holding my tongue." "I know," he said, the two words stark. He did know. He understood the cost of that containment, the wearying discipline of it. He lived it every hour. In her, he saw a reflection of his own isolation, not behind bureaucratic walls, but behind the ramparts of principle. The recognition was as unsettling as it was profound. Cora drew a breath, as if steadying herself against this unexpected detente. "What now, Colonel?" "Now," he said, the weight of the coming weeks settling upon him. "They have seen the partnership. The next test is whether they believe it." He meant the Congressional Committee. But as he watched her absorb this, the candlelight catching the gold flecks in her eyes, he knew the greater test, the more perilous one, was unfolding here in this quiet room. The performance was over. The true alliance, fraught and unscripted, had just begun. The morning after the dinner arrived with a crystalline clarity that felt to Cora Maddox like a reprieve. The performance was over, the borrowed slate-blue gown returned to its peg, and the honest world of ledgers and primers awaited. She descended the iron staircase from her gallery quarters into the bustling main floor of the headquarters, where the morning cacophony of telegraph keys and clerks' murmurs was a welcome symphony of the mundane. Her path was toward the side yard, where the old stables were being transformed into her temporary schoolroom. She had taken no more than 3 steps across the worn plank floor when his figure detached itself from the shadowed alcove near the map tables. Colonel Harding stood already clad in his service coat, though the day's heat had yet to accumulate. The silver at his temples caught the pale light filtering through the high windows. "Miss Maddox." Cora halted, the edges of the small stack of slates she carried pressing into her palms. "Colonel, I am bound for the schoolroom. The carpenters promised the benches by noon. They will be delivered." He moved to stand before her, his posture that of a man accustomed to occupying space decisively. "Your pupils are not due for another hour. You will accompany me first." It was not a request. The worn, low timbre of his voice held the same inflection he might use to order a patrol. Cora's chin lifted. "Accompany you where, precisely?" My duties, as outlined, pertain to this compound and the evening's social engagements. I have lessons to prepare. Your duties, he countered, his deep-set, amber-flecked gaze holding hers, pertain to the success of this office. That success depends upon understanding the terrain beyond these walls. You have seen it only through the lens of a burning schoolhouse or a dinner table. You require a broader view. I have walked Memphis lanes for months, Colonel. I am quite familiar with its terrain. Not as I know it. He took his hat from a nearby stand. I am inspecting 3 bureau ration stations this morning. You will observe. It will inform your conversations with our guests regarding the practicalities of our work. The Memphis Daily Post is not the only audience requiring persuasion. The argument was logical, wrapped in the infuriating administrative precision he wielded like a blade. To refuse would seem petty, an admission of fear. Cora placed the slates on a clerk's vacant desk. Very well, for the sake of the broader view. A plain, enclosed carriage waited at the loading dock, a uniformed driver atop the box and 2 outriders stationed fore and aft. Harding handed her in, then took the seat opposite, his long legs arranged with careful distance from her skirts. The carriage interior was close, smelling of leather and his shaving soap, a crisp, faintly medicinal scent. They rode in silence through streets slowly coming to life. He did not play the tour guide, but his attention was perpetually outward, scanning rooftops, alley mouths, the faces of men lounging in doorways. Cora watched him watch the city, this man who processed peril as another might process paperwork. The first 2 stops were brief and utilitarian, a storefront where freedmen lined up for meal and salt, a church basement where women collected sewing kits. Harding spoke with the sergeants in charge, his questions terse, his notations in a small leather-bound book swift. Cora observed the profound, weary gratitude of the recipients, the meticulous records kept, the sheer scale of need. It was a side of his work she had intellectually acknowledged but never witnessed, the administration of survival. The 3rd station was a cooper's yard on the northern fringe of the city, nearer the scorched remains of her own school. The atmosphere here was different, the line of people more subdued, the surrounding buildings more dilapidated. As the carriage rolled to a stop, Harding's entire frame grew still, then subtly taut. His scrutiny of the shadowed perimeter sharpened. "Remain inside," he instructed, the words leaving no room for debate. He alighted, speaking quietly with the outriders, who nodded and moved their mounts to flank the carriage more closely. Cora watched through the window as he approached the bureau agent, a young lieutenant. Their conversation was brief. Then, from the mouth of an alley across the rutted street, 3 figures emerged. They were not hooded, but their postures were deliberate, slow, as they leaned against a wall to observe the distribution. One spat into the dust. A woman in the ration line, clutching a child to her hip, glanced at the men and quickly looked away, drawing her shawl tighter. The simple movement was a familiar, silent testament. Harding saw it too. He turned from the lieutenant and began to walk, not toward the alley, but across the line of sight between the observers and the queue. He stood there, a solitary blue figure, his hands clasped behind his back, making no overtly threatening gesture, only an immovable presence. The message was unmistakable. Proceed. For a long minute, nothing happened. The very air seemed to congeal. Cora's breath shallowed, the rough fabric of her skirt absorbing the dampness from her palms. Then, one of the men pushed off from the wall. He said something to his companions, and the 3 of them melted back into the alley's gloom. The distribution continued. Harding did not move until the last person had received their allotment, and the yard was empty save for the soldiers. Only then did he return to the carriage, his features hewn from granite. He entered, settled opposite her, and knocked once on the roof to signal the driver. As the carriage began to move, he finally spoke, not looking at her, but out at the passing buildings. "You see the commodity we trade in, not just flour or cloth, a space, a moment of safety in which to receive it. That is what your schoolhouse must become. Not merely a building with a reinforced door, but a space where fear is kept, however temporarily, beyond the threshold." Cora's pulse thrummed a rapid rhythm against her ribs. It was not the lurking men that had unsettled her, but his action, the calculated silent interposition of his own person. You placed yourself directly in their path, a specific kind of path, one too public, too official for the methods of the alley. They prefer shadows and crosses planted in the night. He turned that weary, penetrating contemplation upon her at last. You asked why you must accompany me. That is why. To understand that the dinner table and the ration line are the same battlefield. The former secures the funds for the flower. The latter requires the will to stand between the flower and the darkness that would take it. You must master both fronts. The carriage turned onto the broader avenue leading back to the headquarters. The familiar red brick walls came into view, a bastion of order. But Cora no longer saw just the cage of their bargain. She saw, with arresting clarity, the man who commanded its garrison, not a cynical bureaucrat, but a soldier holding a desperate, crumbling line, and she had been conscripted to his side. He helped her down at the dock, his grip firm and brief through her glove. Her pupils would be arriving soon, expecting knowledge. What she now carried was a different kind of lesson altogether. I will be in my office until this evening's briefing, he stated, already withdrawing into his mantle of command. But as he turned to go, he paused, looking back at her. In his eyes, for a fleeting instant, was not the colonel's assessment, but something more personal, a recognition of the stark education he had just forced upon her, and perhaps a trace of shared fatigue. Your composure was noted, Miss Maddox. It is a form of courage, too. Then he was gone, leaving Cora standing in the busy dockyard, the spectre of the alley still clinging to the edges of her mind, and the unsettling realization that her adversary was no longer a single stern man in a blue coat, but the profound and perilous complexity of the alliance she had struck with him. The return to the cotton factor's warehouse was conducted in a silence more profound than the one which had accompanied their departure. Colonel Nathaniel Harding did not offer a hand as Cora Maddox descended from the carriage. He simply stood, a solitary figure in blue upon the cobbles, until she had passed the sentry and mounted the iron stairs to the gallery. His attention was already turning to the orderly who approached with a sheaf of telegraph flimsies, his posture resuming its habitual brace against the day's burdens. Cora retreated to the spare sitting room that served as her parlor. The slate blue dress, borrowed finery from Mrs. Peabody, felt like a costume she could not shed quickly enough. The images of the day persisted, the patient lines of men and women, the meager allotments of meal, the unyielding set of the colonel's shoulders as he placed himself between the queue and those watching silent figures, and her own schoolhouse, a skeletal black scar upon the earth. She had seen it from the carriage window, a glimpse that had tightened her throat. He had not commented, had not even glanced her way, but his timing of the route had been deliberate, a lesson in stakes. A firm rap sounded at her door just after the supper hour. The orderly presented a tray bearing a pot of coffee, a cup, and a folded note. The colonel's disciplined script, all sharp verticals, requested her presence in the library at her convenience to review the household accounts for the next event. At her convenience was, she knew, a military formality. It was a summons. She found him in a small, book-lined room off the cavernous main floor, a sanctuary of sorts from the bureaucratic din. He had shed the frock coat with its golden epaulets and stood in waistcoat and shirt sleeves, the leather of his braces catching the glow from the lamp. The sword in its scabbard lay across a ledger-strewn desk, a stark reminder of the world beyond the walls. The scent here was different, oil from the bindings, dust on old paper, and the faint, clean trace of his shaving soap. Miss Maddox. He did not turn from the shelf he was perusing, though the line of his back stiffened slightly at her entry. Thank you for coming. You stated it was a matter of accounts, Colonel. It is. He selected a volume, its spine emitting a soft, protesting sigh. And other things. The coffee is fresh. She poured a cup, the simple action granting a moment to compose herself. He moved to the desk, gesturing for her to take the chair opposite. The ledger before him was open to columns of figures precise as a column of troops. The next gathering will be larger, he began, his tone that low, worn register of a man accustomed to being heard over distance. A reception for the Northern Aid Society representatives. Their goodwill translates to congressional influence. The expenses for refreshment must be justifiable. but not parsimonious. I would have you understand the allocations. Cora listened, following his tapered finger down the lines. He spoke of lemonade, of pound cake, of the cost of lamp oil versus candles. It was mundanity, yet beneath the numbers lay the architecture of his strategy, every penny a brick in the fragile edifice he was building. She asked a question about the sourcing of sugar. He answered with a précis on local supply chains versus military provision. Another query about music led to a discourse on the symbolic weight of parlor songs versus martial airs. The conversation, against all odds, slipped from the transactional into the intellectual. They debated the efficacy of symbolic gestures versus material aid. He cited Clarendon on the pitfalls of imposed governance. She countered with passages from Miss Beecher on moral suasion. The coffee cooled in their cups. The warehouse around them settled into the watchful quiet of the night, punctuated only by the tread of the sentry below. It was during a lull, as he refilled her cup, that the mask of bureaucratic efficiency fractured. He did not resume his seat, but leaned against the desk, looking at her not as an asset, but as a person. "You held your composure today," he stated, "at the Cooper's yard. It was noted." "By whom? The observers?" "By me." The admission was quiet. "You did not flinch. Many would have." Her fingers tightened around the porcelain handle. "I was not afraid. I was incensed that a woman required a soldier's protection to claim a ration of salt." He was silent for a long moment, his deep-set eyes, amber in the lamplight, holding hers. "The circumstance is all we have, Miss Maddox. We build upon its ruins, or we are buried beneath them." He looked down at the sword on the desk, his hand resting near its hilt. "My wife," he began, then stopped. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they did her. He had never spoken of her. Cora waited, the very air in the room grown still. She was a Charleston belle, exquisite, accomplished. Everyone admired her devotion to her soldier husband. A muscle worked in his jaw. Her letters during the war were masterpieces of affection. I carried them until the paper frayed. After Appomattox, I found a packet of her earlier correspondence. To a cousin. It detailed the tedium of playing the patriot's bride, the calculation of my rank and prospects, her relief at my prolonged absences. His voice did not break. It grew quieter, more precise, as if reporting a casualty list. The admiration was all performance, the devotion, a fiction. The profound isolation he wore beneath his harness of duty was no longer an abstraction. It sat in the room with them, palpable and raw. "I am sorry," Cora said, the words inadequate. "That was a cruel betrayal." "It was a revelation," he corrected, though without sharpness. "It convinced me that my capacity to inspire genuine feeling was barren, a personal reconstruction doomed to fail. This," he gestured to the ledgers, the warehouse, the world outside. "This work is clean. Its parameters are clear. Its successes and failures are measurable, not like the heart." Cora understood then the true terms of his bargain. He was not merely risking his commission. He was risking the last vestige of his belief in connection itself. Her defiance, her unwillingness to perform a part she did not feel, was perhaps the first genuine thing he had encountered in years. "My father," she heard herself say, "was a man of formidable principle too, a Congregationalist minister. He believed in fiery sermons and rigid doctrine. He believed a woman's mind was for scripture and household accounts. When I announced my intention to attend the normal school, he told me I was choosing vanity over duty." She drew a breath, the old wound a familiar ache. "He said my thirst for learning was unseemly, and that no man of substance would ever ally himself with a bluestocking who challenged him. I left believing I had traded a father's love for a purpose. Sometimes, in the quiet, I fear he was right on both counts." Nathaniel Harding did not offer empty consolation. He simply listened, his weary focus fixed wholly upon her. "He was wrong," he stated finally, with the absolute conviction of a man used to assessing evidence. "The challenge is not the flaw, it is the proof of integrity. A man of substance would be a fool not to see it." Their gazes held across the desk, over the ledger of accounts and the unsheathed sword of office. The professional scaffolding of their alliance, hostess and commander, teacher and bureaucrat, fell away. What remained was two solitary people, each nursing a private wound inflicted by love's failure, recognizing a kindred resilience in the other. The clock on the mantel struck the hour, a sharp sound in the hushed room. The spell, though not broken, was gently set aside. He straightened, the commander returning. "We should adjourn," he said, his tone softer than before. "The accounts are in order." She rose. "Thank you for the coffee and the conversation." He gave a slight, formal nod. As she moved to the door, he spoke again. "Miss Maddox, the next time we go to the ration stations, you will wish to bring slates and primers. The children there have nothing to do but wait." It was an offering, a peace treaty written not in political strategy, but in practical compassion. It acknowledged her world and invited it into his. "I shall," she said, and left him there amidst the books and the lamplight, the shared confidence hanging between them like a promise, delicate and perilously new. The understanding they had reached tonight changed everything. Tomorrow would demand they decide what to build upon its fragile foundation.
You stood like iron in the flame, a soldier carved without a name. Every word you never said still echoed louder in my head. I fought you like I knew how to, with every truth I held as proof. But something in your silent war felt like I've been there before. We don't speak what we become, we just carry what we've done. Between ashes and your eyes, I found a truth I couldn't hide. Not surrender, not defeat, but something stronger underneath. You don't bend and I don't break, still we tremble in the space we make. And in this war we never play, I'm learning how to understand. You never asked me to believe, you never tried to make me kneel, but every step you took beside felt like a line I couldn't fight. You hold the world with steady hands, while everything inside you stands on memories you won't confess, and battles you won't ever rest. We are built from what we lost, not from what it didn't cost. Between ashes and your eyes, I see the man behind the fight. Not the rank, not the command, but something reaching out my hand. You don't fall and I don't run, still we burn beneath the sun. And in this silence we defend something neither of us If I stay, will you let me see the man you hide so carefully? If you break, I won't turn away. I was built to stand and stay. Between ashes and your eyes, I found a place where truth survives. Not surrender, not control, but something deeper than we know. If this war is where we stand, then let it shape us hand in hand. And when the fire fades to dust, let it lead. The two of us, no more walls, no disguise, the truth.